Gestalt Principles. The human brain is an incredibly complex organ capable of processing massive amounts of information in nanoseconds. But to do this, work as efficiently as possible, our brain looks for patterns or logic to speed up the process. The Gestalt principles are an important set of ideas that, when implemented correctly, can significantly improve the aesthetics, user-friendliness, and function of a design. Gestalt is a German word for shape or unified whole. Our brains are exceptional when it comes to seeing the bigger picture. It's why we see faces and objects in clouds or trees, for example. Austro-Hungarian psychologist Max Wertheimer wrote the most influential proposal of the theory of Gestalt psychology in 1923, but the essays do date as far back as 1890. Gestalt psychology is a school of thought looking at the human mind and behavior as a whole. It suggests that we don't simply focus on every small component in the world around us, but rather see it as its entirety. It's played a massive role in the modern development of the study of human perception, so it's no wonder it's been incredibly influential on graphic design. In the simplest form, the theory is based on the idea that the human brain will attempt to simplify complex images by organizing multiple elements into a whole rather than a series of disparate events. Our brains are built to see structures and patterns to better comprehend our environment. In this lecture, we're going to cover the 11 Gestalt principles: figure ground, proximity, similarity, continuity, closure, simplicity, uniform connectedness, common fate, parallelism, focal point, and past experiences. All right, there are 11 Gestalt principles to keep in mind. It's hard to say exactly how many there are. Some are more common than others, but we're going to focus on these 11, which are the most frequently used in design. When put together, these principles can help you create a strong and intuitive user experience and ultimately drive the intended behavior that you want. The 7 most common Gestalt principles are figure ground, proximity, similarity, continuity, closure, simplicity, and symmetry. But some newer theories are also regarded as Gestalt principles, such as uniform connectedness, parallelism, common fate, focal points, and past experiences. We're going to cover them all. The principle of figure ground. According to this principle, people segment visuals into 2 components, figure and ground. The figure is the object or person that is the focus, and the ground is the background. This results in people having wildly different interpretations of an image depending on which part they see as the figure or the ground. So, for example, in the classical optical illusion you see here, you might either see 2 faces or you might see a vase, depending on how your brain interprets that. This principle describes the eye's tendency to see and separate objects from their surrounding background. You can also see this effect in a variety of logo designs. It works because human eyes want to see the figure, or the foreground object, and the background, or the ground, has 2 different planes of focus. Everything that's not figure is considered ground, which can be used to create some interesting visual effects and tricks, particularly when the designer or artist introduces deliberate ambiguity, a favorite technique of the surrealist M.C. Escher. In contemporary design, this principle is often used to convey 2 different messages simultaneously. For example, in the Mac OS Finder icon on the left, you might see either a happy face or a happy face in profile looking at your computer screen. Both are happy, right? Likewise, in the FedEx logo, if you look at the negative space between the E and the X, right here, you can see an arrow. This shape gives a sense of motion and direction that makes sense for a shipping company that prioritizes speed, like FedEx. All right, the principle of proximity. The Gestalt principle of proximity suggests that we tend to see close-set objects as being in a group. For example, in the diagram on the left, you probably see an image A as 1 block of dots and image B as 3 columns. In the social justice poster, Lubalokova combines several smaller violent images grounded against a field of blue to create a larger, more impactful image of peace. Proximity uses the close arrangement of elements to create a group association between those objects. If individual elements are also similar, they will tend to be perceived as a single whole, even though they're separate elements. Proximity or grouping can be achieved with lots of different commonality, including shape, color, texture, size, or any other visual attribute. When we look at the Adidas logos, if those stripes were all over the place, it would mean nothing, but they come together and you see it as a whole. When used in web design, this principle conveys a sense of commonality. So for instance, security and application icons are grouped on the Google Workspace landing page, so viewers quickly understand that these images are related. The principle of similarity. This principle theorizes that we mentally group objects that look alike. So for example, when you look at this image, you see alternating rows rather than blocks of dots because the two different colors. If the dots were all different color, you wouldn't see the image in the same way. The similarity between different elements can be shape, color, size, texture, or value. The more commonality that individual elements have, the greater the sense of coherence, thanks to similarity. A particular element can be emphasized when it's dissimilar, breaking the pattern of similarity. This effect is called an anomaly. You can see this principle frequently in web navigation menus. So for example, Zoom's homepage, all the links that take users to the app are blue, whereas the links that are related more to the customer journey, like product pages, pricing, and resources, are gray. Without you realizing it, the color differentiation signals that these links have different functions. On the example here, you can encourage the viewer to behave the way you want by using only color differentiation. If both buttons are the same, it becomes confusing and slows down that comprehension. And the principle of continuity. According to the principle of continuity, we perceive objects arranged in continuous lines or curves as more related than elements on a jagged or broken line. So for example, you likely see two overlapping lines and not four lines meeting in the middle here. So you see this rather than this, and then this, and then this, and then this. So continuity just means these are all kind of going in the same direction. Continuity is the principle through which the eye is drawn along a path, line, or curve, preferring to see a single continuous figure than separate lines. This can be used to point towards another element in the composition and is seen where a line is cut through one object. It's often on a curve, aligning perfectly with a secondary element. Take Pinterest. For instance, while the images on the screen are all very different sizes, they're arranged in columns which create unbroken vertical lines of negative space between the pictures. Here, the continuity principle drives users to scroll up and down through the app, as the vertical column layout encourages vertical movement. So even though these are all weirdly different sizes, you have this negative space that tells you, there is some sort of grid present, there is negative space to continuously force your eye up and down. The principle of closure states that even if an image is missing parts, your brain will fill in the blanks and perceive the complete picture. For example, we can still see the circle and rectangle. We still understand that this is a soccer ball, even though the lines are not there. Some of the most recognizable logos apply this principle. It's also a common feature in web design. So for example, when you see a partial image above the fold on a screen, like the pink image on Markups.io homepage, your brain wants to complete it by viewing the whole picture, which unconsciously drives you to scroll down the page. Closure is a common design technique that uses the human eye's tendency to see closed shapes. Closure works where an object is incomplete or an interior space of an element is not fully closed, but the viewer perceives a complete shape by filling in the missing information. This technique is often associated with stenciled artwork, but it's also closely associated with logos. The principle of simplicity is also known as Prägnanz, a German for good figure. The principle of simplicity is the idea that people will perceive and interpret ambiguous or complex images in the simplest form possible. In this example, you're more likely to see the left image as a simple circle, a square, and a triangle, like the main image on the right, because the three similar shapes make more sense to your brain than the original amorphous shape. According to psychologists, when we identify an object, we first seek to identify its outline. Then we compare it to known shapes and patterns. So without even realizing it, we're taking these steps. We finally combine the identified elements to recognize the whole. Therefore, a simple and well-defined design will more quickly communicate the desired message than a detailed illustration with ambiguous contours. This principle is super helpful when you're creating a logo. You want to strip away everything that's unnecessary and only use essential elements to tell the story. Rather than seeing a combination of different colored squares and semicircles, you will likely see the whole image. The principle of uniform connectedness. This principle proposes that visually connected objects are more related than objects with no connection. For example, in the diagram here on the left, even though there are two squares and two circles, we see the square-circle pairs as more strongly related because the line visually connects them. Designers typically use this principle to visually illustrate a process or connected ideas like you would see on an infographic. The principle of common fate is a rule that objects that move in the same direction seem more related than elements that are stationary and move in different directions. Common fate often implies motion and is useful for designers wishing to emphasize strokes. Consider separate curves of the Kirim logo. Common fate creates an implied motion so that we almost see each stroke framing the letter being written before our eyes. Similarly, their similarity and proximity bring these shapes together and create a finished letter form. Common fate can also be useful in establishing 3D forms. So, for instance, in the Pure Paper logo, the larger shape is moving in one direction and the overlapped gray shape that's curving the opposite direction imply that they belong to separate groups of background and foreground. You can often see this principle at work on product pages. The screenshot from the Allbirds website, you can see that all the sneakers are facing the same direction. However, the photos at the bottom of the screen depict different types of shoes. The model's feet all face different directions. The principle of parallelism. Similar to common fate, parallelism is the understanding that parallel objects are seen as more related than elements not parallel to each other, as you can see on this diagram. We see this principle at work on Away's homepage. Many of their images depicting their products place the objects parallel. In contrast, images of travel destinations at the bottom of the page are not parallel, underscoring the differences. The principle of focal points. According to this principle, contrasting elements stand out more to us than similar ones. So, for example, in the image on the left, our eyes are drawn to the green square because it's a different size, shape, and color than the purple dots surrounding it. Most designs have focal points because they help you direct your audience's eye to an important element or drive them to take the desired action. For example, the call to action buttons are usually contrasting colors, as you see in the HoneyBook homepage screenshot here. Our eyes are naturally drawn to the bright teal color because it stands out from the darker colors on the page. And lastly, the principle of past experiences. Which is the rule that our past experiences influence our visual perception. So you likely interpret the red, yellow, and green circles as traffic lights because that's where we often see these colors and shapes. This has been applied to your phone, so when someone calls you, you immediately interpret red as stop or decline and the green as go or answer without even reading. Past experience typically shows up on app icon design because universally understood shapes can convey a lot of information without taking up a lot of visual real estate. Many of the default Apple icons are recognizable shapes and symbols. The FaceTime icon is a video camera, the Mail app features an envelope, the clock app looks like a clock. It's an interesting principle. To some extent, it poses a threat to all the other Gestalt factors, because if a factor is experience or habit is Gestalt, then that experience goes against a perception of similarity or proximity parallelism. What happens to those factors? Do they simply go away? Are they no longer valid? Since we don't all share the same experiences, past experience can also be the weakest of Gestalt principles. Color and shape can have varying meanings across different cultures and generations. For instance, large bugs make me uneasy, so the image of Kafka's metamorphosis also makes me uncomfortable. And then we can look at Microsoft's Save icon, for instance. This icon depicts a floppy disk, an object that many younger people don't even recognize, which makes its past experience weak for some people but stronger for others. One of the main purposes of design is to solve problems. Gestalt principles help designers make order out of chaos and concentrate on things that are important to and convey a lot of information in design without overloading the audience with too many things at once. The proper use of them leads to intuitive designs that are deliberate, easy to understand and consume. Designers that are aware of these principles can create optical cues that are easily recognizable by the audience, leading to better perception of the designs and, in essence, solve more problems.